The moment the front door clicked open, Amanda knew, not as a flicker of intuition, but as a certainty that settled in her chest like a stone she couldn't move. Daniel stepped inside, tie loosened, shoulders hunched with the weight of another day at work, eyes wandering for some hint of solace. He found her sitting at the kitchen table, arms crossed, back straight, the kind of posture that carried more than exhaustion. It carried resolve. Something had shifted in her, something that had been brewing silently, patiently, until the air between them could no longer hold it. Amanda didn't warm him with a smile, didn't soften her tone with small talk. She waited for a moment, just long enough for him to notice the gravity of the room, and then, in a calm voice that left no room for negotiation, said the words that would shatter their shared world. She wanted a divorce. Daniel froze. His mind stumbled as if trying to catch up with his body, which remained eerily still. His heart pounded a frantic rhythm, yet his face betrayed nothing. This wasn't a moment of anger or grief. It was a seismic shift in reality, a door swinging open into a life he hadn't imagined. The silence that followed felt like it had been waiting for decades, pressing down on them with the weight of everything unspoken. Slowly, Daniel pulled out a chair and sat deliberately, as if bracing for a storm that had already arrived. Amanda's words were measured, unhurried, and final. There was no mention of counseling, no pleading for patience, no suggestion that this was temporary. It was a plan, one she had rehearsed in quiet corners of her mind. Daniel searched her face, hoping, as he had many times before in arguments and confessions, that this was just a momentary flare of frustration, but the firmness in her eyes, the unyielding set of her jaw, told him that there was no reversal, no compromise. He opened his mouth, but the words stumbled, trailing off in the heavy silence. Finally, he spoke. His voice, calm and deliberate, belied the storm inside. He reminded her, softly but firmly, of the life they had built together, the sleepless nights with their daughters, the vacations, the late nights when he tucked her in on the couch, the ordinary yet sacred moments that had stitched them together. He begged her, not with desperation, but with the quiet persistence of someone clinging to the remnants of a shared history, to pause and look at all that before walking away. But Amanda's gaze didn't falter. If anything, it seemed mechanical, almost detached. The problem wasn't him, she said. He had always been good, a devoted father, a patient husband, a decent man, but she had changed. Something inside her had shifted, and she had to follow this new path, as unfair as it might seem to those left behind. Daniel felt the familiar tightening in his throat, the one that had arrived in unexpected waves during moments of heartbreak. But he maintained composure, his voice steady as he responded with respect, promising dignity, a measured separation, and above all, protection for the daughters caught between them. Amanda's body relaxed slightly. Relief, fleeting and delicate, passed through her, as if she had anticipated resistance that never came. She spoke then of Chloe, her longtime friend, a divorce lawyer who had guided her through calls and meetings, who had been a quiet architect of this rupture. Daniel's frown deepened, realization settling in like a cold shadow over his understanding. Every unexplained meeting, every sudden phone call involving only the children, suddenly made sense. She had been preparing this moment long before it arrived, and yet, despite the preparation, despite the certainty, the conversation had to continue. She spoke of the 90-day legal separation, the rules that allowed dating others without moral accusation, the logistics of bills, the children, and the car they had bought together. The words were practical, almost surgical, but each syllable landed with an emotional sting, a reminder that the life he had known was fracturing. Daniel listened, absorbing every detail with the patient attention of a man already learning that there were no easy answers. He asked about the house, the schedule with the children, and the way they would split responsibilities. Amanda suggested he find an apartment closer to work, a solution that was practical and distant, both physically and emotionally. Daniel agreed, but insisted on maintaining his presence in the children's lives, insisting on Wednesday and Sunday dinners as sacred markers of continuity, as bridges between the past and a future he had yet to see clearly. He spoke of explaining everything to the girls, carefully, so that they wouldn't carry guilt for decisions made by adults. Amanda listened, but it was clear. This was her script, one she had perfected and now merely performed. He asked the question that hovered over every fractured household. Was there someone else? Was love involved? Amanda's eyes diverted, not in shame, but with a careful avoidance. It didn't matter, she said. This was about her, about the life she felt was no longer hers. The words were worse than confirmation, yet Daniel absorbed them in silence, feeling the unspoken betrayal as deeply as if she had named another man outright. Still, he did not attack. He only set boundaries, reminding her that choices had consequences, and that even in a modern world of emotional freedom, 2 children remained caught in the middle. Amanda hesitated, a flicker of doubt passing across her carefully constructed armor, but she did not retreat. It was too late. Daniel retreated to the bedroom, the photo of a happier time on the nightstand, sunlit hair, laughter, and the ocean at Santa Monica, now a symbol of something that Amanda seemed intent on erasing. He returned to the living room, measured, calm, offering no unnecessary words. Amanda stood in the hallway as if she wanted to speak, but the words stayed locked behind her teeth. That night, Daniel barely slept. His mind spun with questions that had no answers. He knew, as he had always known in quieter moments of intuition, that this separation would be a labyrinth of emotional complexity, and that Amanda had yet to comprehend the full weight of the life she had chosen to abandon. Morning arrived with cruel normality. Coffee, pancakes, laughter from the girls, their inside jokes filling the space with noise that seemed almost cruel against the silence of the adults. Daniel maintained his routines, sweetness in his voice, warmth in his touch, while Amanda's presence was like a ghost in her own house, body here, mind elsewhere. The dichotomy was almost painful in its clarity. He seized moments of solitude to organize thoughts, to begin reclaiming the pieces of a life that had been quietly dismantled around him. They discussed logistics, moving forward with a kind of formal detachment. Daniel found a small apartment near work, preserving time with the girls, preserving the continuity of his presence. Amanda's responses were measured, as if she had already accepted everything in her private rehearsals. They went through finances, bills, school expenses, health insurance, and extracurriculars. Each topic was a jagged reminder that a story, decades in the making, was now being divided into fragments. The car, a shared symbol of their first major purchase, stayed with Amanda. Practical, yes, but emotionally loaded, a relic of the past. Daniel's silence about Chloe, the friend who had quietly steered the divorce, was deliberate. A reaction too strong could serve as proof that he was impulsive, emotional, unbalanced, giving Amanda leverage. He bit back questions, held back accusations, measured every step as if walking on thin ice while keeping a solid heart beneath. The children were safe, their routine preserved, yet each moment of conversation, each small agreement, reminded him how thoroughly the life he had built had been unspooled. Later, in the quiet of the house, Daniel sat motionless on the couch, hands over his eyes, watching shadows stretch across the room. He did not cry. He did not need to. The stillness itself was grief made manifest. Amanda moved through the space, silent and rehearsed, while he allowed himself the luxury of thought, of memory, of quiet assessment of the new reality. Decisions about when and how to tell the girls were debated, weighed with care, the moral weight of honesty and timing pressing down upon them. Daniel's attention drifted to a drawer, an old notebook, a repository of thoughts, lists, and ideas. Impulsively, he wrote names, women who had shown interest, acquaintances, a subconscious exercise to remind himself that life would go on, that he could still claim desire and curiosity in the wake of loss. He scribbled Natalie's name, Amanda's sister, then ran the pen over it almost apologetically, as if erasing guilt before it could fully form. The gesture was small, pathetic even, but it allowed a breath of life to return to him, a fleeting sense of control in a world that had shifted overnight. That night, Amanda returned from the supermarket with ice cream for the girls, a gesture of normality that had begun to feel absurd. Daniel watched her, measured, silent. She seemed to carry the weight of yesterday, but neither acknowledgement nor apology bridged the gap. Conversations over chores, fairness, and responsibility sparked minor arguments, small fires in the quiet devastation of their dismantled life. Yet Daniel chose restraint, conserving energy for the storms that had not yet arrived, and for the children who relied on him for constancy amidst chaos. The morning air felt heavier after the first night of controlled grief. Daniel woke earlier than usual, as if the sunlight itself demanded accountability, and moved with a quiet deliberation, making coffee, packing lunches, and slipping into the routine he had built over years for the girls. But this morning was different. The rituals were hollow shells of their former warmth. He ventured out, walking past familiar streets with an unfamiliar sense of exile, visiting real estate offices, and eventually securing a modest studio just blocks from his workplace. It wasn't luxurious, but it was functional, a small anchor in a world adrift. The act of signing the lease, shaking hands with the agent, and carrying keys in his pocket felt like the first step in reclaiming not just space, but self. A quiet defiance against the life that had abruptly shifted beneath his feet. Returning home, he found Amanda curled on the couch with the girls, eyes distant yet performing the facade of normalcy. Daniel retreated to the bedroom, methodically packing his clothes into boxes, the physicality of the task grounding him. There were no tears this morning, only the mechanical motions of someone learning to exist within a new framework of reality. Amanda's brief pause at the bedroom door, followed by her silent passage, underscored the chasm that had grown between them. Later that night, Daniel's phone buzzed. An old college friend had learned of the divorce, likely through Amanda's network or Chloe's discreet updates. The message carried a kind of casual concern, a stark reminder that news of personal upheaval spreads faster than the affected can process it. Daniel's response was simple, concise. It's true. There was no elaboration, no justification, no bitterness. It was a statement of fact. When he turned off the light, lying in the silence of his new apartment, the realization settled in that he had been the last to know the contours of his own life's narrative. Amanda had already moved forward socially, emotionally, and logistically, while he was still reacquainting himself with a world where his role was no longer defined by partnership, but by absence and reconstruction. The question of timing arose again, when and how to tell the children. Daniel, principled even in heartbreak, believed delaying honesty would only compound their confusion. The girls had already sensed the subtle shifts, his earlier departures, later returns, Amanda's distracted tone. He insisted they could not be kept in the dark. That clarity, delivered gently, was necessary to preserve trust and mitigate guilt. Amanda, rehearsed in patience, yet still retreating into her newly formed detachment, suggested waiting until the weekend. Daniel, weighing moral obligation against practical readiness, maintained his stance, asserting the importance of immediate clarity, even if it stung. The logistical discussion, though grounded in reason, carried an undercurrent of grief, the weight of parental responsibility intersecting with the shock of their fracturing family. The family gathered in the living room, the air thick with unspoken understanding. Daniel held the older daughter's hand while Amanda guided the younger one, the children seated between them as if caught in a fragile equilibrium. He spoke with measured softness, explaining that he would be living elsewhere for a time, emphasizing that this did not alter his love or commitment. Amanda attempted to contextualize the separation, framing it as a decision between adults needing space and clarity, but her words sounded practiced, hollow in the presence of raw emotion. The older child's tears were quiet yet piercing, the younger's questions naive but insightful, and Daniel answered with honesty, filtered through tenderness, shielding them from guilt and preserving their emotional stability. They hugged, the embrace a fleeting moment of unity before reality asserted itself once more, leaving Daniel seated alone, acutely aware of the permanence of this change, the room echoing with silence that was simultaneously comforting and cruel. Days later, Daniel's move was executed with precision, boxes and suitcases carried into his new apartment. The space, though sparse and smelling of fresh paint, became a sanctuary of solitude. He arranged the essentials, books, clothes, and the framed photo of the girls, to establish continuity amidst disruption. The apartment, modest yet private, allowed him to inhabit grief without collapsing into it. That night, for the first time in decades, he slept in a bed without Amanda's presence, without the familiar sounds of footsteps and laughter threading through the hallways. The quiet was profound, not restorative, but a mirror to the isolation that change often demands. Every sound or lack thereof reinforced the unfamiliarity of this new existence, pressing on him the realization that life had moved forward while he had only just begun to navigate its altered currents. Amanda's eventual return, unannounced and unexpected, shattered the tenuous calm. Her appearance at his door was abrupt, the knock hesitant yet insistent, her eyes swollen from hours of unrestrained tears. She asked to talk, and despite exhaustion, Daniel allowed her entry, signaling space without surrender. She settled on the couch, the silence between them stretching long enough to accumulate tension, anticipation, and unspoken regret. And then she spoke, confessing the affair with Logan. She described him with an almost reverent tenderness at first, framing him as intelligent, kind, mature, a potential reset to her life. She explained their initial meeting as accidental, their subsequent encounters as increasingly frequent, fueled by conversations with Chloe and private moments that had eroded her sense of loyalty. Daniel listened, absorbing each revelation without interruption, without judgment, his calm a stark contrast to the storm she had created and endured. Logan's disappearance, when Amanda filed for divorce and he vanished, was a brutal punctuation to her impulsive decisions. She recounted the humiliation, the betrayal, the legal threats from his wife, and the isolation as Chloe and other friends receded. She sought understanding, perhaps absolution from the man she had left, hoping to find solace in words that could undo neither the actions nor the pain they had caused. Daniel, composed and deliberate, offered her none of the catharsis she sought, merely a glass of water, a gesture of measured civility. He acknowledged the loneliness, the desire for reinvention, but underscored the contrast between illusion and responsibility. While she chased fleeting promises, he maintained the structure that protected their children, their emotional continuity, and his own equilibrium. Her tears fell, unbidden, as the weight of reality pressed down, and Daniel, exhausted and resolute, ultimately told her she needed to leave, that her choices carried consequences she had to face alone. Amanda hesitated, resisting the finality of the boundary he imposed, yet she left, bag in trembling hands, eyes reflecting the guilt she could no longer deflect. 2 days later, she returned briefly to retrieve a code she had left in his apartment, and in the process, discovered the old notebook. Her gaze fell upon the page where Daniel had listed names, including her sister Natalie. The shock was immediate, visceral, a mirror of the dislocation she had caused him. Her voice wavered between disbelief and rage. "Are you serious? You made a list? Including my sister?" Daniel met her stare evenly, coldly, with the unwavering calm of someone who had regained control of his narrative. His response was direct. Yes, he had written it, and from the moment she asked for divorce, he owed her no further explanation. The confrontation was electric, each word a measured blow, highlighting the stark inequity between her impulsive abandonment and his deliberate reclamation of agency. Amanda's anger and incredulity surged, the familiar roles of superiority and ethical high ground she had long attributed to him twisting into unfamiliar territory. Daniel's reply was calm, incisive, and inescapable. She had left him for another man, destroyed the family he had meticulously nurtured, and now, by her own volition, she had lost any moral authority to dictate the trajectory of his personal life. His composure, the quiet confidence in his tone, rendered her argument impotent. She left, trembling, her silence punctuated by tears, an unarticulated recognition of the choices that had defined her downfall. Daniel, in contrast, returned to the couch, leaving the notebook untouched, a symbol of autonomy and a threshold crossed, signaling the definitive end of the marriage and the beginning of a life rebuilt on his terms. Time passed, and with it came the 90-day separation, each day marking a slow transformation. Amanda's solitude became suffocating. The absence of Logan, the silence after the children's bedtime, the hollow routines of her new, unanchored life created a pressure she could no longer contain. She arranged a meeting at a quiet cafe, a place of neutral witness to confront the repercussions of her impulsive decisions. Daniel arrived, steady, deliberate, allowing her space to speak without interruption. She confessed that she had acted impulsively, that she believed she still loved him, and that the divorce had been a mistake, fueled by a desire for something imagined. Daniel listened, his silence unwavering, absorbing each word as one might catalog the evidence of human error without succumbing to it. His response, simple and firm, cut through her hope. "I'm not interested in going back." Flustered, she asked if he was seeing someone. He offered only a half smile and a deliberate refusal to provide more detail, asserting that no explanation was owed, that he had moved beyond her sphere of influence. When she inquired about Logan, Daniel's gaze pinned hers in quiet interrogation. "Are you?" The question lingered, rhetorical yet precise, forcing her to confront the void she had left behind and the irreversible consequences of her choices. Tears streamed silently as the gravity of loss, self-inflicted and inescapable, settled over her, leaving Daniel calm and composed, in possession of the narrative he had reclaimed, anchored in clarity, and ready to move forward. The weeks following the cafe meeting carried a peculiar stillness, the kind that is not peace, but the quiet aftermath of a storm that has left the landscape unrecognizable. Daniel continued with the rhythm he had imposed. Wednesday nights remained sacred pizza and movie evenings with the girls. Sundays became parks and ice cream, laughter and chatter filling the spaces of the apartment that had once felt empty and hollow. He was present, not out of obligation or routine, but because presence itself had become an act of love, a tether to continuity in a life remade from the fragments of a past that had been dismantled by choices both deliberate and impulsive. The children flourished, blissfully unaware of the deeper intricacies that had led to the division of their world, yet instinctively comforted by the constancy of Daniel's devotion. And while the external rhythm of life maintained a semblance of order, the internal landscape, his own emotions, his own recalibrated sense of self, had become a terrain of subtle resilience, a quiet fortitude that he had cultivated deliberately, patiently, and with precision. Months passed, each day reinforcing the boundaries he had set and the life he'd begun to reconstruct. One afternoon, as the sun angled through the blinds and dust motes danced lazily in the light, Daniel sent Amanda a message. He wanted to talk, wanted a meeting, wanted clarity. It was not a plea, not an invitation for reconciliation, but a statement of intent, a measured effort to close lingering loops, to witness the aftermath fully before continuing forward. Amanda hesitated, mind racing with possibilities, fear mingling with hope. Perhaps he wanted to reconcile. Perhaps he wanted to salvage some remnant of the life they had once shared. Against her better judgment, she agreed to come. Alone. When the doorbell rang, Amanda approached with caution, her pulse quickened by expectation. The door opened, not to Daniel alone, but to Natalie. The shock struck instantly, a tangible weight pressing against her chest. Natalie's composure, quiet and deliberate, was unnerving. She held the space for Amanda to enter without flinching, her presence both a confirmation and a declaration. Amanda stepped inside hesitantly, moving silently toward the couch, every instinct urging her to speak, to assert, to demand, yet finding her voice swallowed by disbelief. Daniel appeared shortly thereafter, seated beside Natalie, calm and grounded. The tableau was deceptively serene, yet its implications were seismic. Daniel spoke first, direct and unflinching. He explained simply and with deliberate clarity that he and Natalie were together, that their relationship was not casual or transient, but deliberate and evolving, built from the foundation of trust and mutual respect that he had cultivated after the collapse of his marriage. Amanda remained motionless, her body betraying the internal upheaval, face ashen, tears streaming in quiet disbelief. Words failed her entirely, leaving only the raw acknowledgement of a reality she had not anticipated, a life reconstructed without her involvement, a happiness she had abandoned in pursuit of fleeting impulses. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, as if the room itself demanded recognition of the consequences her actions had wrought. Amanda's departure was slow, deliberate, her movements betraying the inner tumult. She descended the stairs, tears unchecked, a sobbing acknowledgement not of betrayal, for there had been none from Daniel, but of her own choices, the paths she had discarded, and the world she had unmade. Months passed, the summer heat warming the streets while Amanda existed in the shadow of her own decisions. One afternoon, absent-mindedly scrolling through social media, she stopped. There it was, a photograph, a single frame capturing what had been lost and what had been rebuilt. Natalie, Daniel, and the girls, smiles bright, laughter frozen in pixels, an unspoken harmony evident in every glance, every gesture, every reflection of sunlight on water. Amanda stared, the image a window she could not enter, a life she could not reclaim. She lowered her head, voice trembling, whispering to no one in particular, "What have I done?" The weight of comprehension, of irreversible choice, sank into her with unrelenting clarity. Meanwhile, Daniel continued to inhabit his new life with quiet assurance. He watched the girls thrive in the warmth of routine and attention, their laughter and affirmation of the love he had worked tirelessly to preserve. With Natalie, he found companionship, understanding, and shared values that complemented the patience, integrity, and emotional stability he had cultivated through months of reconstruction. Together, they created a life that was neither reactive nor impulsive, but intentional, a careful weaving of new bonds atop the remnants of the past. Their relationship was rooted not in vengeance, not in the tit-for-tat of broken hearts, but in the deliberate pursuit of stability, joy, and mutual respect. The children adapted, unconsciously embracing the harmony and consistency their father provided, finding in Natalie not a replacement of Amanda, but a partner in the continuity of love and care. The narrative of the family, once disrupted, now found a new rhythm. Daniel's apartment, the playgrounds, the pizza nights, and quiet afternoons in parks became touchstones of resilience, places where absence no longer equated to loss, but to a carefully maintained structure that allowed healing. Natalie's presence, steady and patient, reinforced the emotional architecture Daniel had painstakingly rebuilt. Each interaction a reinforcement of stability and trust. Amanda, by contrast, existed on the periphery, a shadow of impulsive decisions and fleeting desires, observing the consequences of choices she had made without foresight. Her world had not ended, but it had contracted, reduced to the weight of what could not be undone, and the sharp clarity of lessons learned too late. The divorce was finalized, each signature a formal punctuation on the end of a story that had unraveled over months. Amanda, having confronted the impossibility of reconciliation, returned her attention to her own life, carrying with her the lessons of consequence, accountability, and the fragile boundaries of human relationships. Daniel and Natalie moved forward with deliberate purpose, building not just a household, but a life anchored in the principles he had silently vowed to maintain: emotional presence for the children, respect and honesty in adult relationships, and the reclamation of personal agency without malice. The girls thrived in the seamless integration of love and consistency, unaware of the intricacies of adult decisions, yet protected by the careful orchestration of their father's integrity. Daniel, finally alone in quiet reflection one evening, sat on his balcony as the sun set, the horizon alight with shades of orange and lavender. He thought of Amanda, not with anger, not with longing, but with the detached clarity of someone who had navigated the storm and emerged grounded. Choices had consequences, but he had acted with intentionality, measured judgment, and unwavering commitment to those who depended on him. The past, once a collection of fragments and regrets, had been transformed into a foundation upon which a deliberate, joyful life could now be constructed. Natalie's hand rested lightly on his, a quiet affirmation of the new chapter, while the laughter of the girls echoed faintly from the park nearby, a reminder that love, care, and presence endure even after the upheavals of betrayal and loss. Months passed with the slow unfolding of life's ordinary miracles: school recitals, ice cream outings, quiet evenings of reading together. Daniel navigated each moment with a balance of vigilance and serenity, ensuring that the children's emotional world remained intact, flourishing despite the fractures of the past. With Natalie, he built a relationship not defined by reactionary impulses, but by deliberate care, mutual respect, and shared vision. Together, they created an environment of emotional safety, laughter, and warmth, a stark contrast to the instability Amanda had left in her wake. Amanda, observing from a distance, could only reconcile with the permanence of what she had lost. Social media offered glimpses into a life rebuilt, moments captured without her, affirming the finality of her choices. The girls, smiling and carefree, remained under the careful guidance of a father who had transformed grief into structure, absence into presence, and loss into opportunity. Daniel's calm, deliberate actions had created a new narrative, one where love persisted not through obligation, but through conscious, intentional choice. In the final act of closure, Daniel sat in his apartment one evening, the notebook he had once used to remind himself of possibility lying untouched on the shelf. It was no longer a tool of hypothetical revenge, but a symbol of autonomy reclaimed. The past, once chaotic and painful, had been reconciled with intention. He was not merely surviving the aftermath of divorce, he was thriving within the structure he had rebuilt, guided by principles of love, care, and presence that ensured the children's world remained stable, his own heart remained intact, and the future, though uncertain, was now navigated with clarity, patience, and deliberate joy. The summers passed, the children grew, and Daniel's life, intertwined with Natalie's in a deliberate and harmonious rhythm, unfolded with quiet triumph. The laughter of the girls, the steady companionship of Natalie, and the knowledge that he had acted with integrity and courage became the anchors of a life no longer defined by the chaos of betrayal or impulsive decisions. Amanda, left with the echo of what she had lost, understood fully, perhaps for the first time, the gravity of choice and consequence. And Daniel, finally at peace, watched the sun set one evening, knowing that he had built not just a life but a legacy of presence, love, and intentionality, a home for the heart that had weathered the storm and emerged resilient, steadfast, and free.